Zane Lowe, Apple Music.
Welcome to another conversation on the interview series. I'm Zane Lowe. These are the conversations I'm fortunate enough to have with some of the most compelling and interesting people making art these days. You know, I don't know why I've always been worried about the possibility of talking to Bryan Ferry. I think I probably read enough interviews with him throughout the heyday of Roxy Music and throughout his solo career where the image that was presented was somewhat uncompromising, which is totally valid, but also perhaps not particularly built to talk about music. Fortunately for me, that's something that I was taught really early on by one of my mentors, which was no artist wants to talk to you. You know, it's not personal. It's not that they don't want to talk to you. It's the idea of talking about music or about art is kind of the antithesis of why we make it. We make it because we can't find the words. So we put it through that filter, and that's how it gets communicated. So I've gone into pretty much every conversation I've ever had with that in the back of my mind, and sometimes at the very forefront of my mind, depending on the first few minutes of the conversation. But with Bryan Ferry, getting back to my point, I was nervous about this one. And in particular because, again, he doesn't really look back. Although in fairness, Roxy Music have in recent times acknowledged their importance and their legacy through shows, never through music. And there hasn't been a new album since the band broke up after a really strong and productive time. But they've remained loyal and played shows and given fans that taste of that magic. So here we are celebrating an important anniversary with somebody who actually turned out to be incredibly generous and charming with his time and his answers. This is our latest guest on the interview series. I hope you enjoy it, the legendary Bryan Ferry. Can you hear Virginia Plain?
Yeah, I can.
When was the last time you actually listened to Virginia Plain is my question.
This afternoon.
I know why that is.
We were rehearsing, and it's nice to check out how you did it originally. And so listening to the original version, yeah.
When you get into the room with your friends who you've known more than half your life, and you get a chance to fire up again as a band that is actually, and I mean this in a loving way, kind of starved us. Compared to the appetite we've had for Roxy Music, you've been very deliberate and you haven't overcooked it. How does it feel for you when you get in the room and you know it's special?
Well, you just have a feeling. And today, working with Paul Thompson, the drummer, it's kind of an emotional kind of connection, which is, music is a very emotional thing, and you have to connect with people on that level when you're working together. And it was great today. We were running through things and slowly getting there.
Yeah. You said something really poignant there, which is for you to truly want to do it, there has to be an emotional connection. And I think that speaks volumes to the legacy of Roxy Music, which is we often look at bands who break up, who decide not to continue for one reason or another for a period of time because there's acrimony there. But I think what I took from that was that if it's not emotionally resonant, then we don't have to do it.
Then it doesn't work. And yeah, so there's emotion between the players and of course the audience is half of the whole thing. And so you get such strong feedback from an audience when you've had a long career, because they're all from different generations and from different scenes and so on. And it's great to get people together, and their common interest is us,
yeah,
and our music. So it's a very special thing, and we're all very looking forward to it, and it's going to be a moving experience for all of us.
It's going to be a very moving experience for me, I can tell you that. It falls on the 50th anniversary of where it all started to some degree, this debut album, which really put you on a rocket ship in some respects. Looking back on it now, with the legacy of Roxy Music over the course of those 8 albums, all the albums that you've done yourself, did it feel fast back then, or were you loving the ride? Were you just like, let's go, put this out and let's ride it all?
The first few years, we didn't really stop. We didn't pause to think. We were running from one thing to the next, from the studio onto a tour, and it was all kind of connected. There was no breaks. except when I think I had my tonsils out in '73.
How dare you? How dare you? How dare you stunt the flow of our band for having to get your tonsils out?
Very inconvenient for everyone. But so, no, it was a bit of a roller coaster, as you said. And jumping from one, it was very exciting. And the first album was pretty well rehearsed, of course. We'd been working on for months and months, kind of putting these components together, this kind of jigsaw puzzle of elements, like a collage of sounds and ideas, and so that album was more rehearsed than the other. We just went straight in for the other records.
You can hear it though, Brian. Like on Remake Remodel, one of the things I love about the first song on your first album is it's like you're introducing the players. So you get towards the tail end of this song and it's like everyone gets their little bar to show off. It just cracks me up every time.
It's great, isn't it? It's just like a little cameo slot for everybody, and they all make their little contribution to the thing. And a great way to start off your first record. Saying, here we are, this is the introduction, And the party sounds we had, the sound effects before the song starts, that was creating a good atmosphere, I think, a bit of a buzz,
That was one of the things I think that people really responded to in the beginning. And it doesn't matter what year you hear this album, you recognize that ultimately Roxy Music are conceptually minded. That it's not just about a collection of 9 or 10 or 15 songs that sound great in one order or another, that there are going to be things that link the songs. It's about creating an overarching mood within each experience.
Yeah. We wanted each album as well to kind of feel different, and they did. And sometimes there was a slight shift of personnel, sometimes a new bass player or something. And of course, the first 2 albums were with Brian Eno, who was amazing on those records. And then the third album, Eddie Jobson enters, who was a really outstanding musician. And so we had some great tools to work with, and some brilliant bass players. The bass player kept changing for some reason and for various reasons. And
it's like your Spinal Tap moment, but it's the other half of the rhythm section.
Yeah. Paul was the kind of powerhouse that kept it all together, and grounded everything.
The way that you describe the revolving door of personnel within the band right from the very beginning is unique, because most of the bands I've ever spoken to who shift personnel describe it as quite a traumatic and unsettling experience. But the way that you describe it, Brian, was it was almost an opportunity. It was rewarding to the overarching creative of Roxy Music.
Yeah, we tried to make the best of everybody's talents, and so if someone left, then somebody would arrive who would bring different gifts and a different take on things. And so I guess that in some ways it always kept things changing a little bit. And of course, in between each record from For Your Pleasure onwards, I'd be doing some solo things as well, which would kind of give me a sort of holiday away from the band for a couple of months or something. And it became a sort of sideline for me to do albums of covers of songs I liked, to sort of extend, broaden my repertoire. These were songs that I wouldn't have written and couldn't have written. And I found they were kind of educational for me. So I would come back to the next Roxy project with a bit more experience of having worked on these other songs and with other players and so on. Yeah.
I feel like when you were making those solo albums, we started to see the side of you and your artistic identity that showed a love of soul music, far more of a focus on the craft and on your performance, less tempo, concept, more can I really capture the resonance of the song. And I wonder when it was time to come back to Roxy Music, which was a far more playful and, like I said, conceptual experience. Did you have to check that side of things at the door a little bit so that you didn't influence Roxy Music in a way that you had changed yourself?
Well, I think in Roxy, it was my main job as I saw it. And it was kind of more inventive because we were working each time from an empty canvas rather than that one that was already sketched in with, words and a melody that Cole Porter had written or somebody or Smokey Robinson or someone. So, yeah, it was Roxy was the main focus for me. The other projects were, I hope, they were enhancing in some way for me as a producer or a record maker, say.
Mm. You talked about the first 2 albums with Brian Eno, and so much is made of that period of time because of what you've gone on to achieve, the other members of Roxy have gone on to achieve, and of course what Brian's gone on to achieve. With the benefit of hindsight, this is like the Avengers of of sort of music and technology coming together. What was it that because Brian didn't have necessarily an obvious musical role in the band. He was brought in to do other things, which now has become somewhat common within a band dynamic. Very unheard of back then. How did you make it make sense working with Brian?
He was a great ideas person and would come up with really great sounds, and he would change the sounds of, say, the oboe or the saxophone or the guitar and treat these sounds and bring a weird and wonderful dynamic to what we were doing, you know. I mean, initially he came to record. We didn't have a tape recorder when we were doing